Tony Stark is a lot of things. A billionaire, philanthropic industrialist, and one of the most ingenious minds in the Marvel Universe. As Iron Man, Tony is one of the world's most prolific protectors, and at the forefront of the Avengers, he is one of Earth's mightiest heroes. That being said, one may argue that for a man as brilliant as Tony Stark, his true weakness and greatest limitation lies in his morality. The desire to do good, but what if Tony Stark had no morals? Well then, he would be superior. With this video, we will be explaining Superior Iron Man. Now, to understand the story of Superior Iron Man, we will first need to explore what exactly led Tony Stark down such a villainous path. This all began on account of the Axis storyline. With this event, Red Skull, the premier Captain America villain, came into the possession of Professor Charles Xavier's mind and incredible psychic powers. However, Magneto ultimately killed the Red Skull, which went terribly wrong, and caused the villain to be reborn as the Red Onslaught. This being was so powerful that not only did the Avengers need to assemble to combat it, but so too did the X-Men. And even then, it was not enough. Not necessarily because of Onslaught itself, but rather the accomplishments of Tony Stark. During the Civil War conflict, Tony compiled a grocery list of sensitive information in regards to every known hero, every power, every weakness. In the end, he purged said information from his mind, but some part of him repressed and stored away that knowledge that Onslaught would then be able to make use of. Not only that, but with only a bit of telepathic influence to entice his ego, Onslaught convinced Tony to weaponize these secrets by way of Stark brand sentinels, made of adamant, and these things slaughtered the heroes with ease, exemplifying just how dangerous Tony Stark could be if he ever decided to. In fact, he would admit to himself that, as a child, he kept a sort of mental journal for all the kids at his school. He observed them, dissecting their behavior, to uncover the weaknesses they simply could not hide. This was his way of preparing against his competition, which, over time, came to be the entirety of the human race. He used his information to get ahead. Manipulation, cruelty, shame. Nothing was off the table when it came to victory, but when he embraced sobriety, he renounced doing so, vowing to the people he had hurt the most that he had concluded such sociopathic behavior. But that wasn't true. Because he did the very same thing to all the heroes around him. Competition. It was what drove him. He sought to prove himself and his worth to everyone around him. Pride was his greatest sin, one he always sought to suppress as best as he could, and Tony's genius, in this instance, most definitely spoke for itself. The heroes were done for. That was until Magneto brought together a collective of villains, and Deadpool, to face these Stark Sentinels as well. The Sentinels lacked intel on them, especially in such a collaborative sense. With the Sentinels dealt with, Onslaught would soon follow, on account of a last-ditch combined effort, thanks to Wanda, the Scarlet Witch and Doctor Doom, an inversion spell, which would shift the hateful nature of Onslaught to instead be akin to the kindness of Professor X, a spell which inadvertently shifted the moralities of all those present, turning heroes into villains, and villains into heroes. Iron Man being one of many, which now finally brings us to Superior Iron Man. His first act of business, an app announcement at a local baseball game, all while dismissing the national anthem in the same breath. This app, by the name of Extremis, was exclusive to the people of San Francisco, free of charge, and promised to turn users into their ideal selves, allowing their outward appearances to truly reflect who they are inside. Now, a truly telling yet easily overlooked aspect of this display would be Tony's drinking of wine. Tony Stark is a notorious alcoholic who has struggled with addiction all of his life. His father was an alcoholic, and from a very early age, had forced Tony to drink with him for the sake of turning him into a man. Alcohol brings out the absolute worst in Tony Stark, as he is a danger to not only himself, but everyone in his something that the Superior Iron Man does not care about in the slightest. But in no time at all, Extremis 3.0, marketed as a technovirus, capable of transforming users into their very best selves in terms of beauty, muscle tone, and health, took over San Francisco. Suddenly, everyone with a cell phone was beautiful and in good health, and it was all thanks to Iron Man. I mean, imagine if any and all cosmetic procedures were free, natural, painless, and accessible. Suffice to say, the app was a hit. Now, despite being poised to be an evil version of himself, Tony was not above fighting crime, although he was above doing it personally. Instead, he operated his Model 42 suit remotely, as he sipped cocktails, hosting pool parties. The Model 42 suit was made up of putty-like smart metals that aligned to a subdermal ghost of an exoskeleton. But Superior Iron Man, being a man of such questionable morals, would take this several steps further, with his signature suit, the Endo-Sim armor. As opposed to putty, this was a completely liquid smart metal that hardened instantly upon connection. As opposed to depending on a technological element for the initial bonding process, Tony extracted certain building blocks from a symbiote, thus making the startup process entirely psionic. Now, Superior Iron Man is a major egotist, and so, more often than not, he preferred to have his face be exposed. However, this isn't like a weak spot or anything. To protect his precious face, he used transparent graphene, known to be the world's strongest metal, rendering even gunfire at point-blank range totally ineffective. The suit also reacts to Tony's emotional state. When he is enraged or upset, it goes from shining blue to flaring red. After a week of success, Tony's Extremis 3.0 devastated San Francisco in a number of ways. But the most drastic ramifications would be seen when the trial period concluded. Suddenly, everyone went back to how they were before, and it was pandemonium. As now, there was a cost of daily renewal set at 99.99. Tony now had an entire city addicted to his drug. The perfection he provided, and the extent to which they would all go to get it back, was something he expected to be entertained. Suddenly, crime had risen, and risen, by way of people who would have otherwise been harmless civilians. A sudden wave of crime, which Daredevil would have to clean up. Daredevil confronted Tony on Stark Island, what had previously been the ever-notorious prison known as Alcatraz. From there, the two would go head-to-head, and in the end, Tony won, throwing Daredevil into the depths of the ocean below, what was very much a sensory nightmare for this blind hero. On another occasion, Daredevil would take an unconscious Tony Stark deep underground, completely disconnecting his tech by way of a small EMP, in a location where no signals could go in or out. In complete darkness, Daredevil planned to keep Tony here until Extremis ran its course, which he knew it would, considering how egotistical Tony is, as he would never set the app up to optimally function without his direct involvement. But Tony was several steps ahead of him. Despite Matt's preparations, the Endo-Sim armor was a case of symbiotic biological technology. Frankly, the suit was alive, and it could feel him, just as much as Tony could feel it. The truth was, he wanted Daredevil to come after him, allowing him to trap him in his own trap, and this is what makes Tony Stark such a fascinating villain. His plan for Daredevil was not to kill him, or anything like that. Instead, he restored his vision. He allowed Matt Murdock to see again, doing so by way of a tailor-made strain of Extremis, which temporarily sent a signal through his ocular nerves, all while reducing the scarring on his retinas. It wouldn't last long. He would need constant boosters, but Tony offered them to him for free, clearly attempting to buy his obedience. You see, from Tony's perspective, as the most intelligent and capable person on the planet, he honestly wasn't playing God. In fact, all this time, he had been playing human. He considers others to be nothing more than specks, which for ages, he had tried to fit in with for the sake of their comfortability. But now he refused to do so. He felt no obligation to justify his actions to those who were so far beneath him. However, Tony would address the crime-related concerns of others by way of yet another announcement. A brand new Stark security system, by the name of IronSight. A network of drone cameras spread all throughout the city. It was thanks to all the data provided by the phones of the populace that the drones possessed a nearly infallible facial and gait recognition system, and this included those with secret identities as well. Tony could now observe the city like the ever-watchful eyes of God. As suddenly, at the extreme expense of privacy, San Francisco was a crime-free city. The system would be able to discover terrorists, criminals, and supervillains, as anyone entering the city would be logged, in a matter of seconds. In time, it would be the ever-persistent Daredevil who would uncover the truth about Tony's Extremis app, the use of which caused an inaudible digital trigger, which activates a virus. The reason Tony was in San Francisco was because the city banned the sale of bottled water, allowing him to put his virus into the water supply. Now again, Tony is only one of many heroes turned villains by way of the inversion spell. But for me at least, he is certainly the most compelling of them all. In most other cases, they're all unreasonably and unbelievably evil, for just evil's sake. But what makes Superior Iron Man so intriguing is the fact that these behaviors and beliefs were always somewhere within Tony, no matter how much he repressed them. When the villains turned heroes made their attempt at undoing these effects, Superior Iron Man and the Inverted Avengers defeated the villainous X-Men, and even then, Tony was not satisfied. He ordered Luke Cage to collect the stragglers and line them up for execution. The only reason he didn't go through with it was because they had more pressing matters to attend to. And even before then, Tony personally led the inverted Avengers in their dismissal of the Mighty Avengers, seeing as the group would likely be an issue for them all in the future, so they were ordered to cease, desist, and disband. But when the Mighty Avengers refused, Superior Iron Man and the others were all prepared to slaughter them. However, despite his villainous disposition, Tony knew all too well that Blue Marvel was simply out of their league. He was just that strong. And so, Superior Iron Man simultaneously caused a Level 5 emergency in Greece, by way of a reconfigured Ultimo drone, which would keep Blue Marvel busy for the time being. However, when Blue Marvel returned to the conflict, and things were shaping up to be a PR nightmare, Superior Iron Man backed off, blaming the whole situation on manipulation, by way of a lesser-known villain by the name of Machine Smith. And to further emphasize just how dangerous a villainous Tony Stark is, even as a hero, Magneto was still inclined to kill the guy, because in his own words, the world cannot survive Stark's brilliance, turned to evil. Yet, even when the effects of the inversion spell were reversed, Superior Iron Man was one of the very few who didn't go back to his old self, because he had prepared a countermeasure against it. When Daredevil went crashing out of a window at Stark Tower, after uncovering the truth about Tony's extremis virus, Tony immediately leapt to his aid. The death of Daredevil on his property would have been terrible for PR, and so he would not allow it. He had his endo-sim armor bond with Daredevil mid-descent and save him. However, with the suit now acting as a restraint for the man without fear, Tony forced the vigilante into his workstation. He would not allow the truth to get out. And so, he inflicted a form of minor brain damage on Daredevil, erasing his memory of these events. Tony then had Matt admitted into a hospital he controlled, where Matt would be closely monitored for a few weeks with no outside stimuli, giving Tony enough time to do what he needed to do. As a hero, Iron Man refused to have most of his tech be in the hands of world power, but the Superior Iron Man possessed no such moral restraint. Because of this, to the United States military he would offer the plans to create something that was beyond just a weapon of war, as with it, there would be no war. It was a tool, a pure annihilation, which he would sell for $200 billion. Plans he also had written in Russian and Chinese for later dealings. From there, Tony would attempt to purchase one of the largest media empires in the world. He intended to skew all narrative in his favor, for the sake of enacting his vision upon the world unresisted by the public. His ultimate plan being the designation of life and death, saving humanity from its ultimate extinction, and overpopulation by way of thinning the herd, according to his judgment. However, Pepper managed to intercept this deal, purchasing 54% of the company, barring Tony from such media exploitation. Now, the true power of Tony's endo-sim armor would be put on full display when he was faced by a previously latent contingency plan of his. As many years ago, fearing mental domination, Tony not only made his suits resistant to psiotic influences, but also created a digital backup of his mind, which, in the worst-case scenario, would fight against him. And this was the worst-case scenario. It was Iron Man versus Superior Iron Man, and even if digital Tony's suits were compromised, he would simply resurrect in another one. Against his heroic version of himself, Superior Iron Man would take his godly manipulation of others up a notch. He hosted a massive party on Stark Island, and then, by way of some shortwave reprogramming, was able to enslave the users of Extremis 3.0, suspending their bodily control, and using them as completely disposable human shields. However, Iron Man would counter Superior's move by way of what was essentially an Iron Man army, which, mind you, were all simultaneously controlled by the heroic Tony Stark. These various suits from over the years would all assault Superior Iron Man, but the endo-sim armor was no joke. He completely stopped the momentum of one of the attacking suits with a single hand. He then displayed his suit's full power capabilities, bonding with an even greater amount of the liquid metal, until he was a completely hulking figure. Even when faced by this absolute horde of Iron Man suits, piloted by a version of himself, it was an absolute massacre in his favor. They were being downright obliterated. Even when they dogpiled him and seemed to be getting the upper hand, it was simply for the sake of destroying many of them simultaneously. This was child's play. The Model 36 Hulkbuster armor would face him atop the Golden Gate Bridge, and in no time at all, Superior Iron Man ripped its arm off and destroyed it in a single hit. A suit that was designed to and literally took several direct hits from the Incredible Hulk. That is astonishing. Ultimately, the battle would be concluded by Pepper, who would use a sonic blast to dismiss the synthetic symbiote suit of his. However, in actuality, the suit possesses no such flaws, as Superior Iron Man would never build his most advanced armor without precautions against such a looming weakness, as loud noises. He only let her take him in for the sake of infiltrating Resilient headquarters, where he embedded a virus that destroyed his heroic backup cell. However, he would, for some reason, show one last gesture of kindness to his former self, by way of a quarantine drive that would hold his entire consciousness. However, that too would be destroyed, effectively killing the old Iron Man forever. And in the wake of all this, Pepper would use the very company she had swept from Tony's clutches to expose the truth about his extremist virus, ruining his reputation forever, leaving him to be completely and utterly alone. Sometime later, Superior Iron Man would go off-world and face Thanos' cabal by his lonesome, this being one of the most intimidating and powerful collectives in the known universe. However, in the midst of this, he did successfully manage to kill Corvus Glaive, before being taken down by the former Herald of Galactus, Terrax the Tamer, a cosmic-level threat, from which point, he was imprisoned for several months. Once released by some of his former Avengers allies, Superior Iron Man, with Sol's hammer, a Dyson sphere he designed capable of destroying an entire planet at only 2% power, would single-handedly kill the entirety of the invading Shar Imperial Guard and invasion fleet. Superior Iron Man, however, would meet his end in a fight to the death against his old friend Steve Rogers, who had now been equipped with a Captain America version of the War Machine suit. Tony's endo-sim armor at this point was at its lowest, following all that came before. But man, this grudge match was brutal, and the reasoning behind it was the fact that Tony and the rest of the Marvel Illuminati were willing to sacrifice other worlds for the sake of protecting their own. A reality Captain America had once been privy to, and actually managed to convince them otherwise, using the power of the Infinity Gauntlet as an alternative. However, the gauntlet, along with 5 of the Infinity Stones, shattered, with the Time Stone simply disappearing. And once they were out of options, the Illuminati were willing to place immorality on the back burner for the sake of saving their universe from sudden annihilation. But with Captain America being, well, Captain America, he refused. And so Tony had Doctor Strange wipe his memory, which he eventually regained. During this fight, Steve Rogers viciously beat into Superior Iron Man, ripping the very armor from his body. However, Tony returned the favor with a point-blank blast at Cap's unprotected face, which did not stop the Patriot from getting one last hit in, before Tony finished him off with another devastating blast, only for a SHIELD cruiser to crash directly upon the location, sealing both their fates. Iron Man is easily one of the coolest characters in the Marvel Universe, and for me, this glimpse into what an unhinged and morally corrupt Tony Stark would be like was a really interesting one that I wish we got a lot more from. And if you're interested in more in-depth videos like this, be sure to like and subscribe.